Merry met, virtual traveller, and welcome to Stories from Lore, a podcast that invites you to rewild yourself through story by exploring nature, folklore, and the stories it inspires. My name is Dawn Nelson, and I'm an author, consultant, and professional storyteller. Episode 2 of Season 5 is Winged Things. For this season, we are diving into the medieval Bestiaries to discover the strange and familiar creatures that lie within its pages. As the subject of winged things very much overlaps with the fiery winged beasts of the previous episode, Born of Fire, I'm going to concentrate specifically on the birds in the bestiary. And I am using the MS Bodley 764 bestiary, a 13th century manuscript translated by Richard Barber as my reference, as well as many other fantastic books written by some very learned folks, and you can find a list of references in the show notes. So without further ado, let's take a look at the feathered beasts of the medieval texts. Birds whose cries foretell disaster, six who've flown forever till after they find the seventh the key to the end, the world unto the darkness send. Birds and winged things have long been auspicious. Still today there are poems about magpies and robins who tap on windows and foretell of death, and this poem foretells of disaster. This disaster is divined from the whistling of 7 mysterious birds, all flying together. This was particularly important to miners, and if you saw or heard these birds before entering the mine, it foretold of death, mine collapse, or some other tragic misfortune, and many would not enter the mine if this happened. There were reports of miners who had heard these birds in the night refusing to go to work the next day. And I tell my version of this bit of lore in Season 2, Episode 5. If you go down to the coast here in the UK, it shouldn't be too long until you hear the cry of the curlew or the whimbrel. These are the long burbling whistling calls which many believe are those associated with the 7 whistlers. Other culprits may be the oyster-catcher, golden plover or lapwing. However, the lapwing, or peewit as it is known because of its call, is more likely to be associated with the marshland spirit, the tiddyman, which I mention and tell the story of in Season 2, Episode 3. But these 7 winged birds are of the here and now. So what of the winged things in the bestiary? Well, there are a plethora of birds in the medieval bestiaries, some of them familiar to us and others not so. Eagle, ostrich, parrot, pelican, hoopie, owl, stork, crane, jackdaw, crow, they all make an appearance. However, even the familiar ones sometimes have some interesting thoughts and beliefs attached to them by our monastic ancestors scribing away in the scriptorium. As you might expect, those birds that you can find here in the UK are more accurately described and their behaviour is more accurately interpreted. However, not always. In the MS Bodley bestiary, as the eagle ages, its wings are said to grow heavy and its eyes cloud over. It then flies into the sun to burn away its clouded eyes and dives 3 times into a fountain to regain its strength and splendour. It's not completely explained how the eagle still has its sight after burning away its eyes in the sun, but apparently it does. Coots are the unlikely friends of eagles. Coots are said to adopt their chicks when the eagle rejects them. Why might the eagle reject its chicks? Well, according to the bestiary, it tests its young by making them look at the sun. If they look away, then they are not real eagles and they drop them to earth. But it all ends happily because the coot looks after them. It's possible, if you squint when you're looking at a baby coot, that it could be mistaken for an eagle chick, as they are both extraordinarily fluffy, despite the clear size difference. So perhaps that's where they got this from. The osprey's entry is remarkably accurate, and to quote a section of it, it says, "When they see fish hiding in the depths of the sea, using their keen sight to penetrate the turbulence of air and water, they plunge down with extraordinary speed." I can certainly hear David Attenborough saying this sentence. So, yeah, remarkably accurate. Vultures are described as leisurely and producing young without the need to mate, an immaculate conception of sorts. They are also able to predict death, perhaps an observation that the vulture will hang around a dying animal and wait for its end before feasting. Who knows? The migration flight of cranes was clearly observed, although it was recorded in a very odd way. As we know today, this is one of the highest flying birds in the bird family, and perhaps this is why it was noted in the bestiary that they filled their bellies with sand, climbed the highest mountains until they could see where they wanted to land, and then launched themselves off it with the plan of landing in the aforementioned spot. If you have weak eyes, the dung from a little white river bird known as a charadrius is said to be the perfect cure. Perhaps this is a little egret, I'm not sure what the charadrius is, and the picture within the bestiary does not really illuminate this any further either. But this is also another death-divining bird. However, this bird will sometimes do you a favour. If you are likely to survive your illness, then it will take the illness from you and fly it up towards the sun and burn it away. If you're going to die, it'll just turn its back on you though. A jackdaw is said only to repeat malicious gossip, and probably got this reputation from its chattering call. The feathers of the haas bird, again I'm not sure which bird this is actually referring to, are very useful for lighting your way as they luminesce in the dark. The kingfisher is referred to as the halcyon, and this is in main due to the Greek myth which I mention in my book Stories of the Sun. In the book I write the following. In the Greek myth of Halcyon and Ceyx, the two were so in love that they thought nothing could touch them. On occasion, they even called themselves Zeus and Hera, which of course angered the actual Zeus and Hera. Ceyx was a protector of sailors, sheltering them from the storms at sea, and so as a punishment for their vanity, Zeus sent a storm to drown Ceyx. So strong was their love that a distraught Halcyon drowned herself so that she might join Ceyx. The gods were moved by this and turned them into kingfishers. The Greeks then believed that kingfishers nested in the midwinter, way out at sea, laying their eggs on a raft of twigs. It was believed that in sympathy for Halcyon and Ceyx, each year the gods would calm the waters for 7 days, either side of the winter solstice, in order to allow Halcyon to incubate her eggs. This belief is also noted in the work of the Roman author Pliny. He writes that as long as the kingfisher is sitting on her eggs, there will be no storms at sea. So as we can see, this is a belief that has endured through the Greek mythology, the Roman writings of naturalists and philosophers such as Pliny, and then into the medieval monastic bestiaries. I think we can all agree it is a good story, and it's always those that have good stories attached to them that are remembered. One of the most famous misguided ornithological theories was that of the barnacle goose. In the bestiary, it notes that these birds grow on pine logs which float on the water. To do this, they hang their beaks from the seaweed that is on the log. In the early part of their growth, they are protected by a shell, until eventually they grow a full coat of feathers and drop into the sea. Another strange mythological being which many of us have heard of is the half-human bird-woman of mythology, known as sirens. These beguiling creatures lured sailors to their death with their song. And we meet these creatures most famously in the story of Odysseus, and the ship's meeting is described by Odysseus in the following section of Homer's story. I anointed with this the ears of all my comrades in turn, and they bound me in the ship hand and foot, upright in the step of the mast, and made the ropes fast at the ends to the mast itself, and themselves sitting down smote the grey sea with their oars. But when we were as far distant as a man can make himself heard when he shouts, driving swiftly on our way, the sirens failed not to note the swift ship as it drew near, and they raised their clear-toned song. Come hither as thou farest, renowned Odysseus, great glory of the Achaeans, stay thy ship, that thou mayst listen to the voice of us two. For never yet has any man rowed past this isle in his black ship until he has heard the sweet voice from our lips. Nay, he has joy of it, and goes his way a wiser man. Odysseus famously survives this meeting of the sirens and the knowledge of their song by being tied to the mast by his crew, who all have wax in their ears, as is described in that scene. There is much, much more to explore of the birds in the bestiaries, but I cannot possibly hope to cover them all here. But I do hope you've enjoyed this brief little flight around some of the stranger entries that piqued my interest. So what of today's birds? Well, there are over 11,000 species of birds worldwide. It's difficult to tell because some species exist that we don't actually know of. Over 600 of these are in the UK, and sadly, 70 species are red-listed birds. This means they are in grave danger of becoming extinct, and many of these birds were mentioned in the bestiaries. These include curlew, Bewick swans, nightingales, whimbrels, grey partridge, hen harriers, ring plovers and many, many more. We can hope that by remembering these birds and speaking their names into the world, that we can help others to remember them and bring them back from the brink so that they can appear in the bestiaries to come. With this in mind, after the story in this episode, I will speak the names of the birds as the music plays us out, and I invite you to join me. You can find a link to the full list of just over 70 birds in the show notes. But first, let me tell you the story of the Queen of the Birds. A long time ago, when there were very few humans in the world, all the birds of the globe gathered in one place. You can imagine the cacophony of sounds, the squawking, the cawing, the hooting, the screeching. And they were all there arguing about who should be king of the birds. They'd been there for quite a while when out of the middle came a very loud voice. "I am Eagle, and I should be king. Look at me with my beautiful talons and my amazing black glossy feathers, my golden beak and my beautiful white ruff. Surely I am the obvious choice for king of you all." Well, I don't know whether you've ever stood next to a golden eagle, but they're pretty tall. And I would back away, and all the birds did when they heard this declaration of power. They all nodded sagely and said, "Oh yes, Eagle, you should definitely be king," all but for one, who moved forward out of the other birds, a tiny little brown bird, about the size of a golf ball, with a tail sticking up at the back and a little white mark on her eye. Her name was Wren. "Eagle, I am Wren, and why should it not be a queen?" Well, Eagle looked down at this bird. "Don't be ridiculous. Look at you. You're so tiny. I mean, you're very sweet and all that, but I really, really don't think that you could possibly rule over all of these other birds. Look at them. You'd be in a mess immediately." "I don't think so. Every year I get my husband to make me at least 6 nests, and then I can go around and I can choose one. Does that not sound like the behaviour of a queen?" "Well," says Eagle, "it does sound a little bit high maintenance, but I'm not absolutely sure that it is queenly behaviour. No, I think it's much wiser choice is me." "I tell you what," said Wren, "why don't we have a race? Now, I don't mean a race vertically, oh no, because I know that you could definitely beat me at that. I mean horizontally, right up there. Whichever bird can fly the highest." "Well, that's ridiculous. I can definitely fly higher than you, little Wren." "Oh, well, let's see," said Wren. Said Eagle. "OK, well, if you insist. If you wish to ridicule yourself, well, that's up to you. But OK, let's go." Now, the birds of the ground, they'd bowed out a long time ago. They were not getting involved in this argument. And the owls, well, the owls really are wise, actually. And so they decided that they were going to be the judges of this competition. And, well, I don't know whether you know, but if you want to count up to 3 in owl, it is twit, twit, twoo. And so the owls sat there and they counted to 3 in order for all the other birds to fly up into the sky and join this race. Twit, twit, twoo. And up they went, up into the sky, a huge, duvet in the sky of all of these feathers. And the owls and the kiwis and the ostriches and the emus and all the birds that really can't get up off the ground looked up at this mass of feathers. Whoa. The first birds to come down to the ground were the birds of the hedgerows, the blackbirds and the sparrows and the firecrests and the goldcrests and the little birds that just felt rather exposed up there very quickly. They came back to the hedgerows, toot sweet. The next birds that came down were the birds of the garden. They had seen that if they left all of the nuts and the seeds out without anybody there to protect them or look after them, well, then the squirrels would come down and eat them all, and so they thought they couldn't have that. And so they all came down as well, all the finches, like the green finches and the gold finches and the chaffinches. There's a lot of finches in this country. Bullfinches, there's another one. They all came down as well. Then the next birds. As you could see up there were ducks, quack, 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 flying across the sky. But they had flown far from their ponds, and they too were feeling very exposed, and they were a little bit concerned that if they stayed up there, that somebody down on the ground would decide that they looked like they were a good meal, and they'd end up as duck l'orange, and they did not want that. So they flew down to the water and into the reeds. That left not so many birds up there, but nobody had seen Wren yet, and nobody knew where she was. She must still be up there somewhere. The next birds were the geese. Honk, honk, honk went the geese. And they had been flying high. They'd been flying for many, many miles because they'd just come back from their migration. They are strong flyers, the geese, and they do fly high. However, like I say, these geese had just come back from their migration and they were incredibly tired. And so they too flew down and landed on the ground so that they would still have enough energy to make their journey back once the winter had ended. That left the cranes and the storks with their long necks and their rudder-like legs, and they are some of the flyest highers in the world, and they sometimes fly over the Alps. But it's a little-known fact that they're actually quite vain. Those little red feathers or yellow feathers that they have on the tops of their heads, that they really quite like them. They're really very, very proud of them. And if they fly too close to the sun, well, they're worried that they'll be bleached out. And so, well, they came down to the ground as well. That left Eagle. Everybody could see that Eagle was still up there. Quite a small speck, admittedly, but they still knew who that was. And especially when he shouted, "Ah! I am Eagle. I am king," he said. And he started to fly back down to the ground. When out of his white feathered ruff on his neck came tiny little golf ball Wren, and she flew higher and higher and higher and higher until she flew just higher than Eagle, and then she shouted down to him, "No, Eagle, I am queen." And down she came. And both Eagle and Wren landed on the ground, and yes, Eagle could quite easily have just squashed Wren with his talons, but he respected her guile and her trickster ways, and he respected her intelligence and wisdom. She had won. He bowed to Wren, and that is how Wren became queen of the birds. And now whenever you pass a hedgerow and you hear the very, very loud call of Wren with that little trill on the end of it, you know that she's just letting you know that she is queen of the birds. Thanks for joining me around the hearth for this episode of Stories from Lore. For more folklore and stories, you can subscribe to my Substack newsletter. Just hop over to the Substack site and search for Ceridwen's Cauldron, or use the link in the show notes. You can upgrade to paid for just £5 a month to access extended episodes in the archives, extras, and for this season, an exclusive monthly podcast for subscribers called The Story Forecast. Signing up as a paid or free subscriber is much appreciated and helps to support the podcast and my work with folklore and story. As well as Substack, you can find me on Instagram and Facebook as The Bard Dawn. Reviews are also gratefully received, so please do leave me a review on Apple iTunes or whatever it is that you listen to your podcasts. Your support is greatly appreciated. I hope to see you again soon, as I'd love to tell you another story. Until next time, toodle pip. Slavonian grebe, leech's storm petrel, black-legged kittiwake, roseate tern, common pochard, Eurasian curlew, puffin, European turtle dove, willow tit, grey partridge, corn bunting, lesser spotted woodpecker, Eurasian tree sparrow, lapwing, yellowhammer, common starling, missel thrush, field fare, song thrush, spotted flycatcher, winchat, wood warbler, lesser redpoll, hawfinch, merlin, hen harrier, golden eagle, white-tailed eagle, capercaillie, grey wagtail, Greenland white-fronted goose, sculp, pochard, gargony, shoveler, woodcock, common redshank, whimbrel, ringoozle, common redstart, firecrest, marsh tit, woodlark, skylark, twite, bunting, meadow pipit, tree pipit, yellow wagtail, house sparrow, common cuckoo, redback shrike, great grey shrike, ringed plover, dotterel, golden plover, snipe, jack snipe, woodcock, black-tailed godwit, greenshank, dunlin, purple sandpiper, red-necked phalarope, common snipe, Temminck stint, little stint, great skewer, Pomerine skewer, long-tailed skewer, and Arctic skewer. Fly high and fly strong.